right, good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for attending today's panel, Why Race Matters in the Workplace. My name is Catherine Kelly, and I am one of the career coaches for our Daniels undergrads. Before I pass the session over to our moderator and panelists, I wanted to provide a few logistical items. Should you all have any questions throughout the session that you would like our panelists to answer, please plug them into the Q&A box, and we will make sure that we get to them at the end. We'll be doing first questions that we have identified, and then we'll open it up to audience Q&A, which is where we will tackle your questions. This session will be recorded, and a recording of this session will be available to all attendees. If you are in My Business 1099 or Business 2099 sections, a recording will be located within our course Canvas page. For everyone else, we will be sending out an email with recording, as well as plugging it into our graduate and undergraduate Daniels newsletters, and then even uploading it to our Daniels YouTube channel. I want to thank all of our panelists as well as our moderator for their willingness to be a part of this conversation and provide their thoughtful insight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to School of Accountancy Professor Anthony Holder, who will be kicking off today's discussion.
Thank you, Professor Kelly, and thank you to everyone else for being here today. As has been mentioned already, we have a lot of other places that we could be, and everyone's extremely busy right now, especially. My name is Tony Holder. I'm an associate professor in the School of Accountancy. I've been teaching for about 17 years, and prior to that, I worked in industry for several years, and I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. I think this is a great opportunity. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to participate in many of these events, and each time it's been an extremely valuable lesson. I've learned a lot. I've gotten an opportunity to, I guess, do a lot of deep thinking about my own implicit biases. And I would argue that we all have them, right? And so underscore the we all have them. And these types of events give you an opportunity to kind of think about that and learn about how the best approaches are for handling those. So I want to be respectful of our time constraints, but I do want to start by telling a story, right? I'm a professor, and so you knew that I was going to start with the story, most likely. Early on in my career, I worked on an audit in Ripon, Wisconsin. And I remember when I drove into town, there was a sign on a tree that said, Ripon, Wisconsin, population 7,200. And when I worked there, and I spent a week working on this audit, I think the population of African Americans was 1, and that's, including me. A little bit of a joke there. So one of the takeaways that I had from that experience was it was a great experience. I'm telling this story many years later because I do think that it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I remember walking around town, and everywhere I went, people knew who I was, and everyone was super helpful. But at the same time, I felt like people were apprehensive, right? And there was just a little bit of, I think, concern as far as what I was going to do next, right? Just because of the unknown. And I think from an institutional perspective, that is one of the issues with lack of diversity. It's kind of a self-perpetuating thing, when you don't have any diversity, and then when you're confronted with diversity, you just don't know how to act. And it's not that people don't mean well. I think people do mean well. Most people do mean well. It's just that it's just sort of unnatural. And so you're not sure how to respond, and the response is unnatural. So again, I want to be respectful of our time constraint. So I'm going to pass it over to the panelists, and we have about 45 minutes for our introductions and our questions, and then 15 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So I'll start with Ivelise.
Thank you, Anthony. My name is Ivelise Zambrano-Herrera. I have been working for Charles Schwab as a workforce planning consultant for over 2 years. But before that, I work for a management consulting firm for over 17 years. I was in your place a long time ago. I graduated with a Master in Finance and also an MBA from DU, and I'm super excited to be here.
Am I next? I don't know how this works.
Anslem, I have you next on my screen.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Professor Holder. My name is Anslem Gardner, and I am an MBA graduate from Daniels. I graduated in 2016. Prior to that and since, I've worked in the nonprofit sector, primarily working with youth of color from marginalized and underserved communities. I worked at Genesis Works Chicago after graduating from DU, which trains Black and brown boys and girls from the south and west sides of Chicago how to work in IT, coding, and accounting, and then worked in full-time or part-time paid internships for their entire senior year. I did that as program director and director of strategic planning, bringing on the coding track with a partnership with Apple my most recent year, and then really recently, in fact, just back in July, I accepted a new role as National Director of Programs for a company called Momentum Advisory Collective, which works with, again, primarily Black and brown boys and girls that are coming out of the system or adjudicated youth. We train those youth in culinary skills, how to be chefs and how to work in restaurants, front of house and back of house. Momentum Advisory Collective got its start from Cafe Momentum, which is a restaurant that was built around the idea that those boys and girls that are coming out of the system that did fail them, that they could be successful if integrated properly into the restaurant industry. So as National Director of Programs, I'm responsible for training them all the professional skills as well as the restaurant skills in partnership with all of our chefs, including Chad Hauser, who is our CEO and founder, and I've been there again since July. So my whole career has kind of been dedicated to pushing the envelope on the corporate side and obviously other sectors to show these different sectors that youth that come from underserved backgrounds can be successful with the proper training, support, and nurturing. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about what I've learned in my adult career and what we can all do a little bit better.
Jordon?
Thanks, Tony. My name is Jordon Isom. So I am a manager with Deloitte and Touche. And so I actually am specifically working in the advisory practice. And so I guess to give a high level of what it is that I focus on, primarily focus on technical accounting, and then also have recently gotten more into the ERP implementation space, so SAP and other things like that. But, you know, I'll say even more recently as of this summer, you know, I think I had a recent kind of, I'll say a career realignment in the sense of, you know, with everything going on, and especially with George Floyd being killed and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all these others, I really started reevaluating kind of what it is I want to focus on while I'm at Deloitte. And so I have increasingly played a larger role, I'll say, in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, and specifically trying to forward efforts in making, I'll say, corporate America more aware of these issues and of, I'll say, systemic racism and systemic bias that exists just through kind of these systems. So I have increasingly played a role in that and am now serving on a newly formed council that sits atop all of Deloitte, which is the Black Action Council. And so we can talk a little bit about that later. But yeah, all of this, essentially what diversity means to me is it's one of those things where, I mean, you can kind of tell by the color of my skin, I live it. And we all have our own stories. And so it's kind of hard not to, I'll say, operate in these spaces without considering what kind of impact it has on you personally and others. And so for me, my focus is trying to make these spaces more accessible, more comfortable, and ultimately making it so that anybody can be in these spaces and be successful and pursue the paths that they want to pursue. So happy to be here.
Briana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brianna Jones, and I work as a product manager at Zayo Group, which is a telecommunications company. So think of providing big bandwidth to some of your Fortune 500 companies. I've been at Zayo for about 5 years now. And in terms of diversity, I grew up on the south side of Chicago and grew up around a lot of people that looked like me. So now being in Colorado, where there's a lot more people that don't look like me, and in most of the situations I'm in, I am the only Black person, or definitely the only Black female around. It's really important to have people understand my point of view and then also understand their point of view, because my background, the way I was raised, I was around everyone that looked like me, and now I'm in a situation where everyone looks different than me, and I'm typically the only one. So I really find it's important to understand diversity coming from both sides.
Thank you. Monica?
Hello, everyone. I am Monica Williams, and I appreciate being a part of this panel. I am also an alum from Daniels College of Business, where I received my executive MBA. Go Daniels. So, so I just want to tell you a little bit about my background. I grew up my career in telecommunications. So I worked at MCI, I worked at Quest, and then spent the majority of my time at Quest CenturyLink. In those roles, I worked a great deal in operations. I did rewards and recognition. I consulted the business on how to improve results and to incentivize the workforce. And that led me into some roles that I was able to oversee company-wide efforts. Part of that was overseeing the employee sales referral program, and then moving into my diversity and equity and inclusion role. It was diversity and inclusion at the time, where I oversaw about 4,500 employee resource group and leaders in the organization, led some of the diversity councils, and was responsible for the diversity and inclusion efforts at CenturyLink at the time. And so when I left that role, I went into a brand new role that was being created at Denver International Airport. And I spent 4 years at Denver International Airport creating the Office of Equity and Inclusion. And so within that role, it was all around diversity and inclusion, employee engagement, future workforce development. Future workforce development is all about introducing people, students, to careers in aviation at an earlier age. And I added a specific focus on students of color and girls. I wanted to expose them to careers in aviation. And so we built some programs that are still around to do that. Also, I had responsibility for ADA and Title VI, which is making sure the airport is accessible to everyone and that services are offered without discrimination. Well, there came a point in my effort to create the Office of Equity and Inclusion and to raise that office up that I decided to join the Equity Project, where I am now. And I did that right around when COVID, when we were asked to stay safer at home. And it couldn't have happened at a better time. The Equity Project is a boutique consulting firm where we partner with CEOs of organizations, government agencies, justice systems, healthcare systems. We're in a great deal of sectors helping organizations to really deconstruct equity, which means how do you actually put equity into your operation? How do you inform organizations about the importance and the value of diversity? And I'm talking about all diversities. Representation matters. But if you ask me, what does diversity mean to me? Diversity means to me, it's about the richness and the beauty of all of us. And I do believe that representation matters. So I'm not saying that race and gender aren't important, because we know that when we don't focus on race, or when systems are inequitable, then you're going to get different outcomes based on race. And so it's important that we have an increased racial diversity and gender diversity throughout organizations. And so that's my lens for thinking about diversity. It's all diversity.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you to everyone else for the introductions. And we've touched a little bit on the first question that I wanted to ask. I know that a couple of you have already kind of given your perspectives as far as diversity. And I'll just read the question anyway. And if you didn't get a chance to weigh in on this question, I'll give you an opportunity now to weigh in on it. And if you did, that's fine. So the question is, diversity is open to multiple markers, race, gender, expression, interest, disability, etc. Why is diversity essential in the workplace? And let me just go to Ivelise first, because I don't think you got an opportunity to weigh in on this question.
Thank you, Anthony. What diversity means to me is the opportunity to bring new ideas and experiences. I think we all can learn from each other. And in the workplace, I think it's extremely important, because that diverse set of ideas, those different ideas and perspective, really leads to better problem solving. And to me, that's one of the biggest contribution that diversity brings. And it is extremely important in the workplace. And without that, we definitely tend, you mentioned at the beginning of your introduction, Anthony, something that we tend to have those unconscious bias. And I agree with that. We all have them. And if we are aware of those, and we are able to recognize and be aware that we do have those conscious bias, and we start surrounding ourselves with different people, different ideas, different perspective, then we are going to achieve better solutions. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of flavor of what my perspective of diversity is. And if anyone in the panel would like to add or contribute to that, that will be great.
Sure, yeah, I'll weigh in. Thank you, Ivelise. And also thank you, Anthony. What does diversity mean to me? Well, I think everything you said, I agree with. And it's representation. So, and that's from every walk of life, right? Because what diversity means to me is capturing every person and individual and idea and segment when you're bringing people together. So that may be the person that's in the wheelchair who we sometimes forget to think about building a ramp for, right? Or that could be the person that comes from a really small village in Nigeria who has a different perspective. And though they're, African, or though they come from Africa, they may have a completely different experience than someone 2 towns over in Nigeria. So diversity is trying to capture as best as you can all of those different perspectives and experiences in life, because, which is the second part, why do I think it's so important? Representation matters. When it comes to serving clientele or meeting business needs, bringing all those different unique perspectives together accomplishes a couple things, but 2 of those things that I think are really important are, one, we can better understand the customer base or the clientele. Because if we're serving a bunch of different customers from all over the world or the United States or whatever, we have those different views captured in our segment, then we'll do a better job serving those. And then two, we also make those employees who are there feel included through that diversity and through having different people that look like them or don't. So they're going to perform better. And in fact, there's this statistic that I found, teams that have above average diversity, specifically management teams, report 19% higher revenue from innovative products and services than those with less diverse teams. So it impacts your bottom line when you have diverse teams. Not only does it feel good for everyone that's involved, but those workers are going to work better, like I said, and they're also going to meet the business needs and create more innovative products better than a non-diverse team. So that's kind of what it means to me and why I think it's so important. And again, I'll say one last time, representation matters.
No, that's great. I want to build on some points that both you, Ivelise, and Anslem have mentioned. You know, I think when I think about specifically diversity in the workplace, I think there's a couple ways to think about this. And it depends on what lens you want to look at it through. There's kind of the, I'll say, person-to-person lens and the individual and the employee lens. And then there's also kind of the organizational lens, right? You know, in general, just as I guess a table stakes, I don't think that it should be necessary in any given organization to make a business case for diversity. Because like, think about what that really is saying, right? We're saying you have to build a case to have people of diverse backgrounds, which, you know, that's not a great way to think about it. But I think all the points brought up before are still valid in the sense that there are benefits, like tangible benefits that have been measured, and we're seeing this increasingly as well. There's a study done that says, I think 83% of Gen Z would prefer an organization that values and demonstrates diversity, equity, inclusion over a place that offers them more money. And same thing with millennials as well. There's a preference for a workplace that is flexible and that is diverse and values those things and walks the walk, so to speak, over money. And so when you think about it from an organizational perspective, that means there is going to be a shift in talent influencing organizations and what organizations prioritize. But, you know, and I think Anslem brought up kind of and Ivelise brought up the issue or the topic of the bottom line, which I think, you know, a great example is just think about Nike, right? So imagine if, you know, okay, like look at popular culture and the groups of people who who buy Nike and who make Nike big and popular. You know, you see major hip hop artists really being a champion for Nike. You see sports stars, many of whom are Black, making Nike big and providing marketing through them wearing these and sponsorships and all these other things. Well, so think about on the flip side, what if you have no diverse people representing that perspective working at Nike? You're very, very likely to make missteps, and now you're going to start potentially doing things or advertising things in a way that is going to actually alienate your market base. And so now you're starting to affect your dollars. Whereas if you have those diverse perspectives, you're avoiding groupthink, you're avoiding assuming perspectives, all of which could give you a competitive edge if you understand your customer, as opposed to, you know, just guessing, oh, well, okay, this customer likes this or wants this. But if you have people who represent those perspectives, then you don't have to guess. You already have that competitive edge. And so it becomes very important, even from a business perspective, to have people with those diverse perspectives, adding to your strategic go-to-market strategy. But even on the personal level, you know, I really resonate with some of the comments of being what I say, the lonely only. Being in these organizations where you look around and you are the one person in that room who looks like you, and how that impacts an individual. You know, I've had many times where I've been, you know, I question whether I want to stay somewhere, right? Because I am the only one and the only voice, or the only person who looks like me. Or, you know, you have incidents like what happened with George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, and you look around and you don't have support because people don't understand your perspective, because there isn't that organizational learning in some cases. So, you know, you think about it I like to think about it from the personal perspective, but also the corporate perspective. And I'm a huge advocate for learning to speak the language of the broader corporate perspective to be influential. But I also don't think that that is how we should have to do it. But whatever will kind of push it forward, I think is important and is of value.
I wanted to add one point, and then we can move forward if you'd like, Anthony. But it's for me, I've always looked at, you know, both sides of the coin as well when it comes to, are we making a business case for diversity? And I think it bodes, in my opinion, and of course it's my opinion, I think it bodes well to be able to say, when you have a diverse workforce, you are going to outperform one that isn't. Not particularly that we should have to lean on that, but the fact that that is true when there is a diverse workforce, 9 times out of 10, it's going to outperform one that isn't, is something I personally think should be celebrated and should be driven home, because we do live in a capitalistic society where the bottom line is going to be placed in front of just about everything every time. So if there are Black and brown boys and girls, for example, when I worked at Genesis Works, who, if we train them for half the time, can do just as good, if not a better job, that's Black excellence in my opinion, or that's Black and brown excellence that's not being captured or being ignored by the corporate world, which is the narrative we were pushing at Genesis Works, and I feel strongly about in what I do now as well, to kind of celebrate and drive that home. So I see both sides of it 100%. And I just wanted to kind of add that little 2 cents in.
I did want to build on what Jordon said, or actually ask a question based on what Jordon said about a lack of support. One of the questions we've gotten in the past from students is, how do you find your voice and confidence in high pressure situations where you feel like you don't have the support?
I'll speak to this one. It's super important, and the other panelists have alluded to this concept. So when you have a diverse workforce, and I'm talking racial diversity, gender diversity, it's important to have a culture or an environment that embraces diversity. So it will do us no good if I show up and we have, you know, all types of diversity, but diverse voices are not heard or valued or considered, and there's not the inclusion that happens to create that. So if I'm feeling undermined or marginalized within the workplace, then diversity is not enough. So the key piece of having the difference and diversity is being able to leverage it as a strength and not looking at it as a deficit. I feel like there's so much deficit that gets associated with diversity. People have these views that, oh, that means I can't hire the best person for the job. No, that's not what that means at all. But what that shows when you feel that way is that you're biased about what does bringing in diversity look like. Does this mean that we're lowering the bar? No, it means that you're widening the net. You're creating access to opportunities that have otherwise been withheld from people of color or women. And so it speaks to a culture and an environment and a system that has to be designed to support diversity. So if it's happening where you are being squashed or your voice is not being heard, I would question if you're in the right environment. And if you're not able to make those organizational changes, and if the organization itself is not interrogating its own systems, then I would say that that is a red flag. If the organization is not making efforts to understand where bias shows up, where there are different experiences when you're Black or brown or when you're a woman, if there are different experiences and different outcomes, you look at higher rates, look at promotion rates, look at terminations, look at how those individuals are being developed within your workplace. You really have to disaggregate the data to find out where your blind spots are, to find out engagement results is another way. Are people of color disengaged at greater rates than others? Or are they not? Like, there are ways that you can uncover where you have inequities. And that's important. And this is not something, and this is where I differ in that it is a business imperative. I believe that it's not going to happen because we will it to be so. It's not going to happen because we wish it were so. You cannot wish this in. You have to work it in. You have to be very intentional, strategic about how you incorporate difference in your organization, how you embrace difference in your organization, and how you leverage it in your organization. That's my view.
Anthony, I would like to add something that Monica was referring to before, and I think is extremely important. Diversity is extremely, it's so important and paramount for any organization. But Monica mentioned something about the environment, and even if we have diversity, but people do not feel that their value, that their opinions are not valued, that diversity lose its importance. So I think, yes, organizations do have a strong responsibility into this, but it's our responsibilities, even if we don't have a leadership position in the organization, to really take it at heart. So it's our jobs to know what those microaggressions are, those small comments that we can do during a meeting that really make people feel bad, and it will make me feel bad, it feel you bad. So for example, if you're in a meeting and you said, can you take notes to an underrepresented group, if you say something like, don't worry about it, it's very complex. I mean, how would that make you feel? Would you be open, even if you have a diverse group? If people are making you feel like that, are you going to be able to contribute? And I think my point is that we need to take a very hard look in ourselves and make sure that when we are in a group, when we are in a meeting, whether we are leaders or not, just an individual contributor, do we take small actions to make everyone to feel value? Like, and I'm a very introverted person. So for those extroverted persons, I mean, do you take a breath in a meeting and let others talk? And I mean, those are small things that can make others feel great, and we can really take all the advantages of the diversity that diversity can bring. So thank you, Monica, for bringing that up.
Also, tagging on to what both Monica and Ivelise have said, it's really, really critical to have an organization that doesn't just put the policies out there, but lives and breathes those policies. And I really felt this because I just returned from maternity leave, and the amount of people that think maternity leave is a vacation or that you shouldn't take that much time off to care for a child, it's absolutely insane. We have the policy there that we have a great maternity leave program, and you definitely have good benefits there, but that's the policy piece. The other piece of that is how people actually feel about that and how they act or think about it. And it's entirely different than what the policy says. The policy supports women having that time off for their children, but in reality, people around you, your coworkers, feel like you're on vacation and you're taking a break, and you're not doing something that's important for you and important for your family. Secondly, it's not just important personally for people to have that time for themselves. It was really valuable to how I manage my team at work. The lessons I learned as a mother transferred very well into managing a team, having empathy, being able to be stern with my team and set goals while at the same time understanding where they're coming from were really important skills that I learned. It made me a lot better of a leader to therefore help our bottom line. So overall, like, you have the policy, but a lot of companies need to make sure they're following up with having a culture that supports whatever their policies are that help with inclusion, diversity, or equity.
And I really like all those points. And I think something that really resonates with me about what you all talked about was the fact that at the end of the day, people drive the culture. And I think this is where it gets into, okay, maybe, yes, you're brand new to an organization and this is your first job, but that doesn't mean you can't influence, right? And I think a key in finding your voice in these organizations is trying to figure out ways to, I'll say, apply that influence, right? So finding sponsors, people higher up in the organization that you can openly bounce ideas off of or express your concerns to. And also, frankly, just voicing your opinions. You're at the table, and yes, you may not be the most senior person, but it's still a value for you to at least voice your opinion. And in my opinion, it's one of those things where you'll find out I'll say the culture of the organization very quickly once you start being true and authentic to yourself in that space and seeing how you're received and how you're met. Does that organization try to lift you up, or does it hold you down? And I think that will tell, maybe, is this the right organization for me? Or is this an organization I want to be right for me, and so I'm going to try to influence it, right? There's a couple ways to look at that, right? And so I think at least just expressing what's important to you, and frankly, normalizing conversations about race, normalizing conversations about LGBTQ plus identity, or the female experience, and that was a great story, Briana. I think so many people don't think about, okay, somebody went off to became a mother, and like the transferable skills of being a mother or even being a parent in general. Those things aren't necessarily always hailed as benefits in an organization, whereas if the organization were to shift their view, they could see like, oh, this is additive and not pulling away from things, right? So in terms of, and I guess the other thing I want to bring up too, and I think that especially for people of, I'll say, target identities, I think this is a reality. In workspaces, especially when you're not in the majority, I think there's like two layers of thought that go on at all times. There's the layer of, hey, I'm going to give everybody I interact with kind of the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to try to, be kind of the best I can be, show up, do things how I think they should be done, or advocate for them to be done that way, and be a team player, right? And then there's the other side where, you hear those microaggressions of, a boss saying, oh, this is very simple, but, maybe them not understanding like that's received a certain way when, let's say, your boss is white and you're black, right? And it's hard not to read into it at times, and there may be I'll say a racially motivated undertone or a bias to it potentially, but there also might not be. And so there's this and I'm just speaking from my own experience, but there's this, I'll say this paranoia, and it's not always paranoia, sometimes it's real and lived. But there's this underlying concern of every interaction you have, it's like, well, is this colored by my identity in some way, shape, or form? And it gets hard to deal with at times. And I'll share a quick story. Like, for a great example for me was, I was working at the Financial Accounting Standards Board at one point, and there was a older gentleman who he had been like an advocate for me to kind of get into this program, where I was the first Black person in this program at the Financial Accounting Standards Board. And he was hearing me tell a story once, and he heard me say, me and my dad, not my dad and I. And he pulled me aside, and he's a white older gentleman, and he pulled me aside and he said, Jordon, you know, I want to call this out because I think it is important for you to at least hear. You know, I want to make sure that you are careful with your grammar, because people might judge you or your intelligence based upon how you speak and your grammar. Even though I know you are smart, I want you to be careful and watch those things, because other people might judge you or think you're less competent because you have grammatical errors, or because you, you know, maybe messed up a sentence structure, or say a lot, or whatever it may be. And so you'll have those moments where your identity will come into play. But, you know, I guess what I would encourage for this group is figure out how much you want it to color what you do and how you go forward. I think there are times where you absolutely have to address it, and there's other times where, unfortunately, you'll probably have to figure out how you want to navigate that situation, and it may not be equitable, right? And it may not get addressed. But those are the things where we talk about representation and we talk about people being there. That's where the support network really comes in. And that's another reason why this is very important and why this topic is crucial.
Thanks, Jordon. And I would add what you mentioned earlier about normalizing these conversations. I think that's the silver lining with everything that's happened in the past few weeks, months, or year, whatever. It's that now we're normalizing a lot of these conversations that we should have. We absolutely should have. Did anyone else want to weigh in on that? We've gotten a few questions from the students that are in the chat that I was going to list. All right, so, and I'll just read what's here. I just want to say the people on the panel give insightful personal experiences. In order for there to be diversity in the workplace, in the first place, the people of different backgrounds need the education to even compete for the job. Do you believe that the primary focus should be on the younger upcoming generation? And then it goes on to say, they need the tools from experienced individuals like yourselves.
I want to weigh in on this one because it's what I've been doing most of my career, training youth, primarily high school students, middle school age, and early adulthood, giving them the skills they need and don't necessarily get from their, their schools and their communities just because of their zip code. So I'll say yes and no, which is a way of cheating at that answer. I think the answer is yes, but I don't think it should only be youth. I think obviously we have a lot to do when it comes to systemic racism, and you do want to start, I think, as early as possible, and with education and with communities, because this is, as you get older, those disparities grow if you don't have intervention earlier on. So I do think you're right in your assumption that if you don't teach youth the skills they need, if they don't have a good education, if they don't have a post-secondary plan and all of these things, it's going to get harder and harder. But because of that, I think it's so important to also focus on adults or opportunity adults that didn't have that. Because when we're trying to close the gap, I think there needs to be kind of a holistic approach. Part of why I focus on the youth and why a lot of organizations do is because I think there's still a shot to close that gap. Then you can close it as an adult, but I think you can have a greater impact if you do some things with youth. When, you know, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, but when thinking about diversity in the communities that diverse people live in, there's oftentimes over policing and under resourcing, right? You have a ton of police officers in the school, but you don't have social workers, you don't have college counselors and guidance counselors. So these kids, these youth, don't really have a chance from the start. They feel like they see a lot of their peers doing it the wrong way, and they don't see a lot of examples of their the adults in their lives that are being doctors or great teachers or lawyers or whatever else it is. And then you mix that with you compound that, I guess I should say, with crime and poverty and all the other things that's going on. I mean, I could speak to just the whole socioeconomic issue that we have in our country for hours. But I think that's why it's so important for those opportunities to happen at a young age. And I do agree with you there. And I do think it's really important for every single person on this call, whether they're Black or white or whatever, but especially those that are Black and of color, to be influences and teachers for those youth that aren't getting it the way they should from their schools. Because again, I'll say representation matters, but also we have some of that lived experience that we can bring back to those youth that are trying to navigate the spaces that are predominantly controlled by white America. So that was kind of a long-winded answer where I agreed with you, but I also think it's important that adults get those same opportunities, because if they don't, how are they going to provide it for their kids or be a good parent, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of my take on it. So yeah, focus on that youth population a little bit more, but don't forego the rest of the population because of it.
Thanks, Anslem. So I'll go to the next question. And I'm going to state this question, but we have another version of this question that I also wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to as well. So this particular question says, do you have any advice for how to have conversations around racism in this contentious political environment?
So I can jump in on this one. I do this often. I facilitate difficult conversations around race, and it's a facilitated dialogue. And so sometimes that's important. It's to acknowledge that everyone comes into these conversations on race with their own lived experiences and with their own lens and with their own identities. And so one reason why these conversations are so heated and loaded and emotional and can create a visceral reaction is because our views are so closely connected and tied to who we are and how we've been socialized, how we grew up, how we were raised. It's connected to what we believe and what our belief systems are. And so it's difficult to separate that and to have it not be divisive. But I'm challenging everyone to have these conversations, even if they make you uncomfortable. And so it's about being comfortable, being uncomfortable. because we've gone for so long, especially in workplaces, avoiding conversations. We've been avoiding the conversations because they're uncomfortable, but we've also not been creating different outcomes because we have not been dealing with what's beneath the surface. And so it's important to enter into these conversations, but realize and recognize that they are necessary, but recognize, and they are not going to be comfortable. Now, one reason why it's important to have these conversations is because the outcomes are different depending on race, but it's also important to recognize that we are all in this together. Now, even though we have different experiences, we're creating a society that we all live in, that we all are going to benefit from there being equity. Equity does not create someone or provide someone a better opportunity than other. It creates opportunities for everyone, right? So it goes back to, I think when we have these conversations, they become so polarizing because we don't take time to understand what it's like in someone's shoes that didn't have the same experience as you had, right? We get so rooted in what our experiences are and don't think through what it might be like in someone else's shoes, right? And so rather than us thinking in a collective, we think individually. We think as an individual. And to solve these issues, it takes everyone. That's why when we define diversity, it's not just Black, it's not just people of color that are diversity, it's everyone. That includes white people. You're also diverse. You're also diversity. Because what this conversation has done for so long is it told people of color that you're diversity, and it told white people you're not diversity. And so it puts white people on the sideline for an issue that impacts all of us. And so it has to be all of our responsibility to change the course. We're living out our history. So history has dictated kind of even the fact that there's a racial construct, but we're living that history, but we have the opportunity to rectify and change the path and the course, but we have to start challenging our own views and what we believe is diversity and what we believe or who should be in this fight. It's everyone. I saw the comment about how do you become an ally to some of these challenges. We like to reframe it as not just being an ally, but how do you become an accomplice? How do you become someone who's a part of the struggle, even though it may not directly impact you? How do you not just stand by and walk alongside a person of color, but how do you become just as invested in changing the outcomes? And how do you play an active role in the workplace as opposed to being on the sideline? That's the shift that I believe that has to happen, that it needs to be all of us that are invested in changing the outcomes that have predominantly impacted people of color in a negative way.
That's awesome. I agree with you on so many different fronts. It's not even funny, but I wanted to also add something to this, that I've had several conversations with my white friends and coworkers, and I think it's important that people watching this panel hear as well if you haven't, and that's around privilege, which I think is one of those very key points that you talk about in conversations about race. And it can be, as Monica said, like it has the propensity to be polarizing, and it shouldn't. One, I'll say before I even like break down my view or opinion on privilege, is that privilege is not a bad thing inherently. Like, you having privilege, I am not upset about that. Like, I'm not upset at you, I should say, as a white person or a white male or a cis white male. Your privilege you're going to have it. There's nothing you can do about that. We are not, as Black people, going to square up on you and fight you for having privilege. Like, that is not ever going to be a thing. So throw that out. Now, what I will say, because I've also had some of my friends say, well, I grew up with a single parent and I grew up poor and I couldn't go to college and I couldn't afford anything and I'm white, so I don't have privilege. Like, okay, I also want to help you understand what we mean by white privilege is not necessarily your socioeconomic situation, but the fact that as a white person, you have better odds of being in a better socioeconomic situation. So you might be poor. Let's say you're a poor white person with a single parent and you didn't go to college and your mom struggled. Now, let's say all those things are true, but for a Black kid. So they had a single Black parent, they didn't have college, they had no resource, the same situation as you, but you both walk into an interview for the same job. Your privilege as a white person may still outweigh or overweigh that person's privilege as a Black person. Not saying that you both don't have struggles, which you both may have had unique struggles, but then being a Black person or a person of color in this country, there are things that aren't afforded that you might have that you don't even think about, even in that situation that you were in. So like, it's important to not think that privilege is just those things. It's very complex and it's very deep. And it's also not a bad thing that you have it. The bad part about privilege is the denial of your privilege, or saying I have the same exact chances or I have the same exact odds at ascending in a company as a Black person, as a white person. That we, as a Black person, I think is wrong, but inherently just being privileged is not. So that's the part of the conversation that I've seen get a little contentious, and it doesn't have to, because we're not angry. We just want you to understand our experience and how it kind of plays out.
And I want to add to that too. I'm loving this thread. So around, I guess, kind of adding to the piece about privilege. The way that I think about it too, I totally agree. I do not think anybody should think I have privilege, therefore I am evil, or I have done something wrong, or I didn't deserve it, or nothing like that. That's not the point. The point is understanding you have privilege so that you can use that privilege in a way that helps more people than just yourself. That's kind of where it stops. And talking about white privilege, somebody framed it this way to me once, and I think this is a really good way to think about it. White privilege may not just get you everything, right? It may be as simple as nobody closed a door on you. Doors may have opened, but nobody closed it. Whereas for some Black folks, for example, or people of color, people may have actively tried to close a door. We had a conversation with one of our board members, and he was telling us a story about him as a board member of Deloitte had an experience where he was working on closing on a house, and when the seller found out that he was Black, they actually tried to back out of the sale. However, the contract was already signed, so he was able to get the house. But if that hadn't been in place, he would have lost the house because of the color of his skin. And so one of the things I want to at least try to cover, especially when talking about why these conversations are hard and contentious, and it triggers something in a lot of folks, and a visceral anger or frustration or denial. It does have to do with identity, and we conflate, and also how we understand the concept of racism as well. So the common way we understand racism is somebody is racist, and that means they are a bad person. And there's only one other thing to be, and that's not a racist and a good person. But we have to keep in mind, it's not that simple. Racism is a system. It's not racism is not the same thing as discrimination. It's also, and therefore anybody can discriminate. It's not helpful to say somebody is a racist. Rather, they discriminated or had an action that is racist. So that's where I would say, I would encourage people, when you have these conversations, start off by saying, you are not a bad person. I don't think you're a bad person. I don't think you're a racist, because that's not even helpful. Let's talk about the actions and the behaviors and how it made me or another person with the target identity feel. That's how you start that conversation. And, you know, kind of coming back to why I think this is a hard topic is because I think a lot of people don't have a lot of racial stamina. And that's because they often aren't in situations where they are, I'll say, confronted with a situation where their identity becomes top of mind. So like, for example, if you're always the majority and you're always in a situation where you are in the majority, you're not going to think like your race has anything to do with anything. In fact, you're actively thinking, I am an individual, therefore my actions dictate how things go and what I can achieve. And I think a lot of people hold those concepts of individualism and meritocracy in our society, but that tends to hide a layer of reality that exists for people of color, which is you still have, no matter how you are as an individual and no matter how you are in terms of what you accomplish, your race or your identity will still influence what you are able to do, where you're able to travel. For example, like I have no interest in, this is my personal opinion, I personally don't really have an interest in traveling to the South because I could walk past a tree where one of my ancestors could have been hanging from. That is the idea of like, I can't escape those things. And so that's, and you know, I think the other piece of why this is difficult is because I read a statistic that about 80% of white people do not have any meaningful relationships with a Black person. So if you think about it from that perspective, there's just a gap in perspective, which is why we have to have these conversations so that it isn't so foreign and it's not, frankly, it's just your aperture is able to expand and you start to understand that people live and have experiences that are colored by more things than maybe what you have experienced. And that's why these conversations are so crucial.
Thanks, Jordan. And I think we could have this conversation for probably 5, 6, 7 hours, maybe easy. But we are going to run out of time. And we had a few questions that came in and there were some requests to answer these questions live. Monica, I think you touched a little bit on one of the questions. As a white woman in the workplace, how can I be the best ally possible for my coworkers of color? So maybe if anyone wants to just take a couple of minutes to respond.
Yeah, I can add just a little bit on that one, because I'll say, I talked about reframing it as an accomplice. And because an ally is there and they support you, but I see an accomplice as a part of the solution, more actively a part of. An ally is kind of like, you know, I'll be there to support you, but I'm not necessarily getting my hands dirty in this process. Now, an accomplice will actually take on issues for you and on your behalf. And so when I think about that in a workplace, it could be echoing. Ivelise did that for me earlier. I said something, she made a comment, and she echoed what I said. So it provides another level of credibility, or it just kind of affirms what someone else said. And so I give that as an example because that's how you can do it. That's how you can start to, you know, you give credit for ideas when anyone does it, but particularly a person of color, because I like what Jordon says. He calls it's a targeted group. And that's real. People of color are often a target. Either they're ignored or they're a target and actively being targeted. Whether it's through microaggressions, whether it's being performance managed out of a system, they're oftentimes being targeted. So, or someone's constantly trying to confirm their bias when someone doesn't line up to what they think they should be. It's when you get those comments like, I never see you as a Black girl. I never saw you as a, like that kind of stuff. Or I'm colorblind. Those kinds of things are dismissing someone's identity or dismissing parts of who they are. They may not be all of who they are, but they are definitely a part of who they are. So it's echoing, it's affirming, it's supporting, it's going to bat for, it's doing all of those things actively. And it's taking space and making space for people.
Tagging on to exactly what Monica said, like that making space is really important to me. I've had some great coworkers that if I'm being talked over or my opinions being put down on certain issues, them opening the floor back up to say, hey, this is a valid point here. We should listen to this point. And like Monica said, echoing these things, it's really important in terms of how a conversation may turn. Because if I don't get my opinion heard or get my viewpoint heard, of course, no one's going to understand or accept that viewpoint. But as an ally, making sure people of diverse opinions have that option to just be heard, making space for them. And that could be something as simple as like telling someone that's talking over them to step down for a second and let them have their opinion heard. Or it could be actually giving them an opportunity, giving them a venue to speak on something. But that is so important. It's just make space for people so different voices, different opinions can be heard.
I just had a real quick thought. Mine, I won't go into too much detail, but specifically Black women in the workplace need space even more than Black males. And something that I've seen happen at my company, even as a nonprofit, is because they're dealing with both parts, right? Like women already are trying to navigate the workspace, which is primarily dominated by white males and males in general. But then there's also, the part of them that gets overlooked because they're a person of color or because they're Black. So I try to, as an ally to my Black female colleagues, pull back and give them space and also help people like shut themselves down a little bit and create that space. But no one can do it better than a white person or a white male in the workplace to understand that there's two things that are being combated. So I just wanted to make that quick point.
And just to add to what my colleagues are saying, just listen. Listen to how people talk about themselves. I think that the best way to be an ally is to listen how they describe their disabilities, what pronouns they use for themselves. And if you don't know, ask. We don't have all the answers. Just ask and just take that moment to, again, listen to what they're saying and use their words and make them feel that you listen to them. And that's how we create those environments that people feel value, and then all those benefits of diversity will come to realization.
And I want to quickly echo something Ivelise just said, because I really like that, is we aren't going to know all the right language. We aren't going to know how to not, I'll say, step on somebody's toes or maybe say the kind of the wrong thing. And that's why we have to have the conversation. And part of the way to navigate that, because I know it's scary to do, part of it is just saying, hey, I know I don't know all the right words, but I want to learn. and I want to understand your perspective. Can you please share it with me? That way you're kind of acknowledging like, hey, I'm not going to act like I know about your experience, but I want to listen, and I want to absorb it, and I want to understand. I think that's really important when engaging these conversations, because it is hard when you don't have that perspective. And I come back to that, you know, again, these statistics that show a lot of people, regardless of our identities, we are not mixed together very well in a lot of spaces, whether it's work, in our personal lives, schools, etc. And so that's why these conversations can be hard, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying. And, you know, as long as you can say, hey, I don't know your experience, but I want to learn, that builds that trust and that respect. And that's crucial to these conversations.
Thank you. So we have, looks like about 3 minutes left, and we do have one more question. I don't know if it can be answered in 3 minutes or not. So I'll let you take a look at the question, and then anybody wants to try to address it. And the question is can everyone see the question? And I'll go ahead and read it just for purposes of the recording. How can we combat the stigma of educating people on very pertinent and extremely necessary topics such as this, especially when we have a president who is paving the way by implementing an executive order on ending teaching curriculum? Looks like I've lost the question.
That was the gist of the question, though, you know, so whoever wants to take that first stab at it.
And we're on.
The first word that comes to my mind is resist, right? Now, it's one thing to have an executive order and you obviously are not able to do something against what your company has established, but it's resist. This work it meets the most fantastic resistance. There is going to be resistance, but also it's not going to happen without a fight. And so you have to be willing to fight for what's right. And I believe that is why this is my life's work. I've always been a fighter. I've always been someone who is going to fight for the person who I see as the underdog. And so it's important to fight for what's right. That's really what I would say is we can find ways to educate each other. And the opposition is not the focus. The focus is on the benefit of the fight. What are we going to achieve when we fight? If the civil rights movement, which by the way, had Blacks and white people and all kinds of people who were fighting for justice side by side. And so it's important to take up your cause and fight for it. Fight for what's right. That's how I would say it. Don't give in, don't give up. It's a fight.
Excellent response. Thanks, Monica. And thank you to every one of the panelists. I think this was a very memorable experience, and I'm just very excited to be a part of it. I want to close by just stating what someone mentioned in the earlier in the chat, that they've learned so much in this session, and thank you guys for taking time out of your day to educate us. I feel more confident in taking strides in becoming a leader as an Asian woman in the US. So pass that along. And for the students, I want you to stick around for a while. I think Ron has a few more things to say, and just want to thank you again to the panelists.
Yeah, thank you all for attending, and thank you so much to all the students who took time out of your day to be here as well. I think this was definitely one of our best discussions yet, and also the best attended, so that's awesome. I did have just a quick note for students who want to continue this discussion, but more along the lines of your Daniels and DU experience, and how diversity, equity, and inclusion relates to that. There will be a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Town Hall with the Vice Chancellor, Tom Romero, today. That's actually at 1 p.m. And then there will also be a Daniels Fireside Chat with Dean Vivek Choudhary at 2 p.m. on Thursday, October 22nd. So Catherine Kelly will be emailing that out to the class for both of those discussions. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and to Dr. Anthony Holder for moderating the discussion.